Okay, people, I went and did it. I bought my first Nikon ever, and it's the Nikon ZF. In this video, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over my main impressions of this retro-inspired full-frame camera, coming from a guy like me who's used Fujifilm cameras for the last 11 years or so. I put around 10,000 or so shots into the Nikon ZF, and I thought I'd make a video talking about my initial reactions and responses to this pretty sweet little camera. I think it's good to know why I got this thing in the first place. And really, my initial reasoning for buying the ZF is because I've been using a lot of old school lenses. So I love the way these old lenses render. And I've been a little bit disappointed by how they act on Fuji cameras, because with the APS-C crop factor, putting these classic focal lengths on a camera like the Fuji cameras changes them completely. So this is my dad's 50mm lens, and on Fuji cameras, it doesn't seem right to be getting a field of view that's a lot like 75mm instead of 50. But with the Nikon ZF, my dad's 50mm lens, it acts like a 50mm lens. Add in the fact that the aperture dial works on a lot of these older lenses, then using the Nikon ZF as my retro lens camera feels right. I can change aperture, shutter, and ISO just like the old days of film. Walking around and shooting with the old Minolta 50mm lens really feels good on the ZF, and I'm loving the retro experience far more than I ever did with Fujifilm's APS-C cameras. I gotta say that this camera is a really beautiful thing to look at, and I've been asked more than once whether it's a film camera, and of course I say yes, and I'm broke and you need to give me money for film. But of course, there's a lot more to this thing than just how it looks. It's hefty though, right? That's one of the bad things. It's a lot like the old film cameras it was inspired by. And that's not something I'd say is a positive. When you pair some of the heavier lenses on the ZF, it becomes a problem because the body itself just doesn't feel that great to handhold. They didn't care much about ergonomics back in the old days, and this camera has that same old school feel, for better and here mostly worse. However, once I got the grip on this camera, a cheap little grip, it was just a transformed experience. It's much easier to hold and feels more balanced in pretty much every respect. As for the rest of the camera, if you want to use it in full manual mode, then it's a lot of fun. The dials feel fantastic, and when you have a lens on the ZF with an aperture ring, it's a fantastic retro experience, like I said earlier. However, when using most Nikon lenses, like the 40mm f2 that I got with the kit, you lose a little of that old school feeling because you have to control the f-stop with the control dial. It doesn't look like Nikon plans to make any new lenses with aperture rings, so it seems like sometimes the ZF has an identity crisis a little bit in the Nikon ecosystem, although it's really not that big of a deal, especially if you're going to use retro lenses like I am. Now, the body is fine. It works super fast. Everything's great. But I think it could have used a couple buttons. Fuji cameras are usually more customizable in my opinion, and I wish I could program a few more buttons on the ZF, although honestly I'd rarely use them since, again, the reason I'm using this camera is for the retro experience. I have mixed feelings about the black and white switch. It's nice to have, and I was excited about it when Nikon first sold it as a feature a little bit. It sounds cool and it's kind of fun, but from a Fuji guy it's also a little lame. Why? I guess the main part, my main beef with it is that my favorite black and white picture control on the ZF is charcoal. And there's just no way to apply the charcoal profile to the black and white dial. So if you're shooting JPEG and you really like that charcoal setting as part of your black and white, process, there's no way to apply that to the black and white button. So for me, it's a big letdown because that is the one that I want to use for my black and white pictures. So that leads me a little bit to talk about Nikon's picture control profiles. There are some menu options that allow us to tweak settings, but the system is not even close to as extensive as Fuji. And in truth, while almost all of Fuji's simulations, they have the ability to drastically change the look and feel out of the picture, many of Nikon's seem a little bit more like gimmicks compared to Fujifilm's time-tested and refined simulations. Now, there are JPEG recipes out there for the ZF. Even Fuji X Weekly has a ZF section, and Nikon PC has a bunch of different options you could dial in and then load into your camera. You could just put them on a memory card and transfer them to your camera system. Your mileage is going to vary here. There aren't as many settings to adjust as there are in Fujifilm, but it's been kind of fun to see what these custom profiles can do for the ZF. I doubt if I'm going to use them very much. I just don't think they're as robust as what Fuji has, but I'm glad that they're here, and I think that other people will get some mileage out of them. All right, so let's just say this. I am totally and completely sick of Fujifilm's autofocus. And the Nikon ZF, honestly, is one of the reasons why. The focus, it just works every single time. I can put it on eye tracking for people and it tracks the eyes pretty much without a flaw. I can put it on bird tracking, it tracks birds, and in general, every aspect of focusing seems pretty easy for the ZF. In fact, every time I use the ZF, it's just another reminder that Fujifilm still hasn't caught up with the autofocus of other camera manufacturers. The Nikon just locks on to what you want it to much tighter than what Fuji cameras do. And it feels like a more robust, fully realized autofocus system compared to Fuji on every aspect. I took the Nikon ZF to the zoo the other day. I shot it with the 400 4.5 and it just did not miss focus one time. Any shot that was out of focus was easily my fault, and that's a contrast to anything for Fujifilm. With Fujifilm, I tend to overshoot, so I still get a lot of in-focus shots, but at the cost of having more out-of-focus shots, more time editing, and more frustration. After so many years of messing around with Fujifilm's absolutely clearly inferior autofocus, the ZF it's just nice to use, and it's not even a stack sensor. Fujifilm, get your autofocus fixed. This Nikon ZF is doing so much better than anything you were doing. You guys need to look at this thing and take some notes. And finally, the image quality aspect of the Nikon ZF. We all know that image quality is much more about light and the vision of the photographer than it is about the sensor. But there is a reason so many people keep asking Fujifilm to create a full frame camera. In general, full frame cameras have better overall image quality compared to APS-C sensors of a similar generation. With the Nikon ZF's 24 megapixels, we have less overall resolution than Fuji's newer cameras. However, things are balanced out quite nicely by being full framed. The noise is much better controlled on this full frame sensor, and when I combine the lower noise with more light on the full frame sensor, I can get more out of these super clean files than I can with Fujifilm. You know, a lot of people talk about Fujifilm's color science, which really is fantastic, and it's a draw for many artists, especially to want to come and hang out with Fujifilm. But Nikon's colors are tremendous too. Nikon images have a clean, natural feel to them, and I think they are really pleasing to look at. Let's talk about final thoughts after putting quite a few photos through the ZF. And to do that, we had to go back to my original point of why I bought the ZF. When I put on my retro manual focus lenses with aperture rings like this Minolta 50mm 1.4, it's just a dream to use in full manual mode. It makes shooting a slower, more mindful experience, and it's the reason I bought the camera. I really dig using this camera with retro lenses, and I got exactly what I wanted out of it. But I didn't expect a camera like this to have so much more performance. It has easily better autofocus, image quality, and general speed and functioning than any camera in the Fuji lineup, except maybe the X-H2S. And my gut tells me that the X-H2S is just not as fast or as good as a Nikon ZF in capturing stuff in more difficult conditions. So yeah, I seriously dig the Nikon ZF. And in fact, the ZF has done for me what I think Nikon really hoped it would do. It was a gateway to more Nikon stuff, and now I also have a Nikon Z8 to shoot better wildlife stuff. I have to say that the Nikon ZF is probably the camera that I was hoping Fuji was going to make with the X-T5 and X-H2. The ZF is solidly built, it focuses as good as I could ever hope, and the images are fantastic. It's beautiful looking, and it also produces beautiful results. With the exciting part being that it's got a ton of horsepower under the hood to keep up with the top cameras on the market, and I just don't believe that Fujifilm really has that anymore. Now, of course, this doesn't mean I'm done with Fujifilm. My main kit for nature and landscapes is still Fujifilm with GFX, but the ZF is now my walk-around fun camera, especially with older lenses, and now that Nikon's got me in their grasp, I've got the Z8 for my speed and wildlife camera. I just don't really have a reason for the Fujifilm X system anymore. So Nikon, good job. This camera got me. I'm now in the throes of Nikon, and I dig what you guys are doing. So what I'm going to leave you with is some more shots that I took with the ZF and some retro lenses and some new lenses, just some of the things that I've seen and shot around here to leave you with. And if you have any questions, throw them below.